So I know I said the last video was probably going to be the last one for a while I was writing my book, but then while I'm writing, I end up getting other ideas for videos. So I've been also logging ideas and then sort of scripting and journaling and jotting those down as I've been writing my book. And then this idea sort of stuck with me, so I thought I'd make a video for it. It's kind of a follow-up actually for my We Are the Multiverse video. I think I sort of lay out and dive a little bit deeper into sort of how my alters perceive their reality and maybe clarify, I think, their beliefs and like their perceptions a little bit on what that means for them because their existence is tied inside of my mind. Right. I mean, it's so fascinating because like just imagining what it would feel like, what it would be like to basically wake up in this world, um, and feel like nothing that you're experiencing, just have this awareness that nothing is real in the way that you thought it was. Feeling like you are a much smaller speck inside of someone else's mind, basically. It'd be like waking up in a simulation. That's essentially what it feels like for them. It is, in a sense, its own kind of simulation. It is a mental simulation. It is a simulation of the mind, of the subconscious mind, and how disorienting that would be and the chaos that would ensue. And that is what happens for a lot of my alters when they have this realization on this certain subsection that they're on, because I think I've said before, the alters that I am in communication with are in this specific space in my subconscious. I don't know if I've named what that space is. I might have said it in another video, but I'm kind of hesitant to repeat it because it is basically a setting in my book that I'm writing. So I'm kind of hesitant to go into it, but it is basically where my alters perceive their version of an afterlife, because before they go to this space, they are living out what they perceive to be their physical lives, where they don't know that they are alters and they are just living their lives as alters in the inner world, which is their version of physical reality, basically, which is, I think, where I've talked about being a gateway system before. So this is where I think these portal dimensions come in, where I have these other subset of alters and alters that I'm not in communication with, alters that are living in the inner world, not knowing that they're alters, because I literally have alters that are also having dissociative minds and are creating their own subset of alters and their own inner worlds, and that is where they are existing. So there's this sort of infinite loop of creation and creator going on inside of my inner world, which creates this infinite subset of alters. I don't want to get too sidetracked diving into that because a lot of that story is going to sort of play out in my book and sort of explaining how that inner world works, but it plays out through, telling the story of a specific group of alters and two specific alters specifically. But anyways, before I get too sidetracked going into that, focusing in on this and sort of understanding how this has made them perceive their reality and existence. Psychiatry frames dissociative identity disorder as a pathology, right? It is as a fractured mind struggling to survive trauma. But what if only looking at it that way is doing a disservice to fully understanding our own consciousness? What if DID isn't just a survival mechanism? What if it is a glimpse into the true nature of consciousness itself? I think this is a blind spot in neuroscience, where I think the experience of dissociation and dissociative identity disorder and other dissociative disorders like OSDD and all the subtypes, I think that this actually ties into a lot of our history of a human species and the experiences of the mystic and the supernatural, and why we as a species cling to these narratives of spiritual beliefs and gods and goddesses and the creation and the creator, and we sort of recreate these stories in an infinite loop and trying to understand what it means to exist and to be here. So despite its profound implications, DID remains one of the most stigmatized and under-researched conditions in psychology. Mainstream science dismisses it as a very rare disorder, rather than a living key to understanding consciousness. But history tells us a different story. Across cultures, mystics, shamans, and prophets have described experiences that mirror dissociation. So out-of-body experiences like astral projection, channeling spirits or deities, time dilation, and reality shifts. I have experienced this too as a DID system. Like I have a prolonged experiences of deja vu, this feeling like time does not exist. It was a part of why I was very convinced for a while that I had a brain tumor, that I was experiencing seizures. The biggest reason why I'm fairly certain, even there is a chance, that they missed something, but I'm fairly certain that I am experiencing psychological seizures, non-epileptic seizures, dissociative seizures, is because my symptoms, the aurora sensations of seizures, they are lasting too long to be epileptic in nature. If they were epileptic, I would likely be dead. Because typically people that are experiencing these frontal lobe seizures or ecstatic seizures that can give you this sensation of oneness with the universe, they would only last for like a few minutes. They're not giving you these sensations of like surreal deja vu that are lasting, for a few hours. That would be extremely dangerous, and it's extremely unlikely that they wouldn't have caught that during the episodes that I had in the 3-day EEG that I had taken at home. But I also will experience like shifts in reality where it feels like I am seeing the world through a different lens. Feels like I'm out of my body. The world will start to look like it's almost 2D, like cartoon-like almost. I kind of describe it as someone who's experienced VR. I've described it as it feels like I have a VR headset on. It looks like I'm looking at the world through like a warped window or a fishbowl, and the world will just kind of look cartoon-like. Another experience that mirrors dissociation is having alternate selves or spirits, deities, whatever they would call it, speaking through them. So oracle trances, past life recall, speaking to God or speaking to spirits or the dead. Through the lens of DID, you could see how this exactly mirrors what DID is. As someone who was an atheist before all of this, I can tell you from experience, I don't know another way to describe it other than it feels like possession. It feels like you are being possessed. The first time, for a long time, like 2 years into my DID, the more muted communication I was having with my alters was very, like, it was always there, but it felt very muted. I was always very, like, it's common for DID systems to doubt their experiences, and I was constantly gaslighting myself, like, am I sure I really have DID? There's no way I really have DID. It was very hard for me to accept the fact, because a system does tend to hide itself. There's a lot of symptoms that tend to hold in on themselves and kind of trick you into thinking like, okay, you experienced this, but did you really? Are you sure? Like, how sure are you? And there's a lot of memory, forgetting your memory, forgetting this happened, forgetting that happened. This sort of dreamlike experiences, you can kind of like wash that away and be like, okay, well, I was just a little dissociated. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. When you become co-conscious during a switch, I don't have another way to describe it other than it literally feels like you're being fucking possessed. It is the closest thing to a supernatural experience that I can put into words. I don't know how else to describe it to somebody who hasn't experienced it. And that's not what I'm saying it is. I know that it's an alter. I know that it's inside my own mind, but I'm using that language to explain to you what it feels like. And also the fear and the shock that it was on my body the first time I experienced it. I mean, I literally went into shock. My heart rate, but when I first started experiencing these co-conscious switches, my heart rate was going up to almost 200, and I was passing out because I was going into such shock. Because it terrified the shit out of me. So, continuing on before I go into another rant, what if these were never supernatural phenomena, but natural expressions of dissociative potential that most people never access? If we entertain this belief, which does sort of mirror this experience with DID, what alters are experiencing as a DID system inside the inner world, inside the mind, because this is what my alters, how they are perceiving their reality, because it is the only reality that they know, in the same way that this base reality is the only reality that we know. This is the only reality that they know, living inside of a mind. So for them, the way they perceive it, the mind doesn't produce consciousness, it filters it. And dissociation isn't a glitch, it's an access point to other layers of reality. And inner worlds in dissociative identity disorder aren't just imagination. For them, it feels like alternate dimensions. In dissociative identity disorder, my alters view themselves as like parallel versions of the self, each perceiving a different slice of the multiverse. So they see the inner world and the portal dimensions inside the inner world as subconscious constructs that gain autonomy. They see switching between identities as like shifting between dimensional frequencies, like tuning a radio to different stations. And I think their ultimate question is, what if trauma doesn't just fracture the mind, but what if it forces it to expand beyond conventional reality? Many with dissociative identity disorder report rich, persistent inner landscapes, some with their own laws and physics and histories and sentient beings like alters. So like with my book, I have alters that have their own stories, like their own history, their own lives. Now for me particularly, and the stories that I will be focusing on, it does directly mirror my own story. But it's different. Like, I don't know, it's almost like as above, so below, where it is my trauma repeating itself, but with these different archetypes. But it is like directly reflecting each other. It's like my subconscious trying to understand what I went through and then playing it out in a different way. Literally like alternate versions of myself under different circumstances, repeating my life just differently because it's a completely different world and a different reality. So the question I think for my alters becomes, are these just metaphors, or are they mental bridges to other planes of existence? If consciousness constructs reality, then a sufficiently dissociated mind might manifest its own. Could shamans and mystics be those who learn to navigate these spaces intentionally? I also think that human history is deeply sated in trauma. We are a traumatized species, and so is its spirituality, so is its religion. So I can't help but wonder if, given humanity's long history of these like possession narratives and exorcism rituals and shamanic trances, where people genuinely believed they channeled gods or spirits or the dead, what if the truth isn't as binary as real or fake? Do I personally believe that these individuals are speaking to celestial deities or ghosts? No. Unlikely, not literally. But what if trauma doesn't just fracture the self? It compels the mind to reach beyond the illusion of a singular reality. What if what's being channeled is an autonomous consciousness emerging from one's own subconscious, like with dissociative identity disorder? Does that make it any less real? And if we entertain that the physical world is a mental projection, then the inner worlds of DID systems, complete with their own laws and sentient entities, are no less virtual than conscious reality. And a mind that constructs its own universe isn't hallucinating, it's manifesting a parallel existence. So what if instead of just merely pathologizing DID, we saw it as a blueprint for further exploring consciousness? What if we asked ourselves, if thought forms can gain independence, are they real? What if the supernatural was always just the natural mislabeled? What if God, spirits, and past lives are just dissociative projections of the layered mind? What if by studying DID without stigma, we can actually uncover what consciousness truly is, how reality could be constructed by our own perception, and whether or not humans are truly potentially multidimensional beings? For centuries, we've searched the stars for gods and goddesses, only to come to a point to, I think, discover that the greatest mystery is the human mind. I think there's a certain irony to this, especially recalling my atheist days when I'd insist that man made God, not the other way around. And although I no longer identify as an atheist, now leaning into idealism, I do still believe that that is true, that man did make God. But I also now see it as the inverse as well. In Ouroboros of existence, where both truths unfold simultaneously across time and space. I don't believe that there is a hierarchy to creation, no creator more powerful than the created, because both are us, different expressions of the same consciousness, the same way that my alters have sort of taught me to navigate my existence as a DID system as I explore and understand what it means to be what I am, within and without, as above, so below, a mind within a mind spiraling into eternity. So through this lens of idealism, spirituality may just be advanced association. The multiverse may not be out there, but nested within consciousness itself. DID isn't merely disorderly, it's a testament to the mind's infinite potential. And the next great frontier may not only be discovered in space, but tied to the uncharted dimensions of our own awareness. So if we entertain the notion that reality is truly mental, then every mind is already a potential portal. And the question isn't whether or not other dimensions exist, it's how many are living inside of your own subconsciousness right now. Have a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.